The taxi rolled to a slow stop at the edge of a quiet suburban street. Elena Ward pressed her hand against the worn leather seat in front of her, steadying herself as the driver popped the trunk. 20 years of service had made her strong, but stepping back into the life she had once left behind made her feel strangely weightless, almost unmoored. At 42, Elena carried more than scars and medals. She carried the silence of 2 decades spent oceans away from this street, this house, this family. She stepped out, the late September air clinging cold against her skin. Her duffel bag, stamped with fading military tags, thumped heavily against her leg as she approached the iron gate she had crossed 1,000 times as a child. The house loomed behind it, renovated but still familiar. The old sycamore tree bent its branches against the attic window, just as it had when she was 12 and broke her arm trying to climb too high. For a brief second, she allowed herself to hope. Maybe her father would step out, smiling proudly. Maybe her mother would finally embrace her after years of silence. But instead, the front door opened and Catherine appeared. Her sister looked sharp and calculated in a fitted blazer, her phone already pressed to her ear. Her expression froze, then hardened into something cold and distant. "Elena!" Catherine's voice dripped with disbelief before sharpening into steel. "You can't be here." Elena stopped just inside the gate, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Catherine, it's me. I just got back. I thought I'd surprise you, see Mom and Dad." But Catherine didn't lower the phone. She turned slightly away, speaking louder, as though Elena were a trespasser standing at her doorstep. "Yes, police. There's someone here trying to break in. She claims she's family." The words slammed into Elena harder than any battlefield memory. For a moment, she thought she had misheard, but the cold look in Catherine's eyes confirmed it. Her own sister was reporting her as a stranger. Her throat tightened, her voice rough after years of command drills and desert dust. "Catherine, what are you doing?" "I'm your sister." "No," Catherine snapped, her tone dismissive, venomous. "You were gone for 20 years. We moved on. This isn't your home anymore." Elena gripped the strap of her duffel, her hand trembling though her posture remained firm. She had faced armed insurgents, negotiated with generals, and walked through war zones unflinching, but nothing had prepared her for the moment her own blood disowned her at the gates of the place she once called home. And in the distance, she could already hear the faint hum of a police siren drawing closer. The gate did not open. Elena pressed the intercom, her finger hovering just long enough to hear the buzz of static before silence swallowed her attempt. She pressed it again, her voice low, uncertain. "It's me, Catherine. It's Elena. Open the gate." The only answer was the hollow click of rejection. The security camera mounted above tilted slightly, its small lens reflecting a distorted version of her face. For a strange, surreal moment, Elena imagined the machine itself was questioning her identity, deciding whether she still belonged here. Then Catherine's voice cut through the stillness, sharper than broken glass. "This house doesn't belong to you. Not anymore." Elena stepped back, stunned. "What are you talking about? I grew up here. This is my home." But Catherine had already descended the steps, her arms folded with the satisfaction of someone holding all the power. "This property belongs to me and Mark now. Your name isn't on the deed, Elena. It hasn't been for years." The words crashed into her with the weight of betrayal. Elena blinked, trying to process what she had just heard. "That's impossible. Grandfather left the house to me. He told me himself." Catherine's smile was bitter, almost mocking. "People change their minds. Wills get rewritten. And while you were gone, the world kept moving. You can't just waltz back into our lives after 20 years and expect everything to be waiting for you." Elena's stomach tightened, her mind racing through memories of the man who had raised her like a daughter, who had once said this house would always be her anchor. She remembered the smell of his study, the stacks of books, the way his hand had lingered warmly on hers when he promised, "This home will always be yours." And yet here she was, staring at a locked gate, with her sister declaring her an intruder. The rumble of a car engine pulled her back to the present. A black SUV rolled into the driveway, sleek and intimidating. Mark Keene stepped out, his presence commanding and smug. His eyes landed on Elena with recognition, but no warmth. "Elena," he said coolly, adjusting his cufflinks as though preparing for a board meeting. "Not a family. You shouldn't be. This property is private." Elena's voice cracked, half from disbelief, half from restrained fury. "Private? This was my home. My name is supposed to be on every paper tied to it." Mark exchanged a knowing glance with Catherine. His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Not anymore. You don't exist here. Not legally, not financially, not in any record that matters." Elena felt her breath catch, her chest tightening. 20 years in uniform, and yet one sentence from her brother-in-law made her feel smaller than she had in her entire life. She took a step back, her boots crunching against the gravel. Behind her, the faint glow of blue police lights flickered at the corner of the street. Her childhood home was gone, not because it had been sold to strangers, but because the people she once called family had erased her from it completely. Through the narrow glass of the living room window, Elena saw him. Her father, Robert Ward. He sat in his favorite armchair, the same one she remembered from childhood, the one that smelled of old leather and pipe smoke. His silhouette was unmistakable, broad shoulders now hunched, hair thinning but still combed back with meticulous pride. For a heartbeat, Elena froze, her breath catching in her chest. This was the moment she had replayed for years while deployed overseas. The reunion, the smile, the recognition of a father finally welcoming his daughter home. But Robert didn't move. He didn't wave. He didn't even turn his head toward her. His eyes stayed fixed on something unseen, deliberately avoiding the sight of her standing outside the gate like a beggar. "Dad," she whispered, pressing her palm against the cold iron bars, willing him to acknowledge her. Her voice cracked. "It's me, it's Elena." The curtain shifted slightly, as though he might respond, but then it fell back into place. The silence was heavier than any battlefield she had ever walked. Her knees weakened, and she let the weight of her duffel slide to the ground. She wanted to pound on the door, to scream, to force him to look at her, but the blue strobe of police lights at the end of the street reminded her that she was already unwelcome, already treated like a trespasser. By midnight, Elena had retreated to her car, parked just down the block. She reclined the seat, her uniform jacket pulled tight around her shoulders, but sleep refused to come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her father's silhouette, so close, yet unreachable. She remembered the nights as a child when Robert had read to her in that very chair. The way he had ruffled her hair when she came home with strangers. The rare, proud smile he gave her when she first announced she'd been accepted into the academy. Now, those memories felt like lies. She stared at the dark outline of the house until dawn crept over the horizon. And when the first light touched the porch, she saw something new staked into the ground. A sign. For sale. Her family wasn't just locking her out. They were erasing every trace of her existence. Elena's chest tightened as a tear finally escaped, cutting a hot line down her cold cheek. She hadn't cried when comrades fell in battle, hadn't cried when she coded on an operating table in a desert field hospital. But tonight, she cried because her own father had disowned her without a single word. The morning after her father's silent rejection, Elena sat in a corner booth of a small cafe, her eyes hollow from a sleepless night in the car. The bitter coffee in front of her tasted like ash, but she sipped it anyway, needing something, anything, to keep her grounded. The doorbell chimed, and a familiar figure stepped inside. Rachel Klein. It had been more than 20 years since Elena last saw her, back in undergrad, before duty pulled Elena into the military and Rachel into law school. Yet, despite the years, Rachel looked almost unchanged. Sharp suit, neat hair, and the same steady gaze that had once made her the best debater on campus. "Elena Ward," Rachel said softly, sliding into the seat across from her. "I saw the property listed this morning. I didn't believe it until I saw your name missing from the deed." Elena's chest tightened. "Missing? It can't be missing. That house was willed to me. My grandfather signed it over before I enlisted." Rachel opened her tablet and turned the screen toward Elena. The listing glared back at her. Property owner, Raven Holdings LLC. Elena blinked, confusion twisting into anger. That's impossible. I never sold it. I never signed anything. Rachel's expression was grim as she reached into her briefcase. That's what I thought. But look at this. She slid a document across the table. It was a transfer of ownership, notarized, with Elena's signature neatly scrawled across the bottom. Elena's stomach dropped. The handwriting looked like hers, down to the angle of each letter, but she knew with absolute certainty she had never signed it. This is forged, Elena said flatly, her fingers trembling as she held the paper. I've never seen this document in my life. Rachel nodded. I checked the notary's credentials. He's already under review for falsifying DMV records last year. Which means whoever filed this went to someone dirty on purpose. Elena leaned back, her pulse thundering. All the pieces began to click, the cold dismissal of Catherine, the smugness in Mark's voice, the way her father refused to look at her. This wasn't just family betrayal. It was calculated theft. Rachel lowered her voice. Whoever's behind Raven Holdings didn't just erase your name, Elena. They built a whole paper trail to make it look like you gave the house away. Elena's hands curled into fists on the table. Then we're going to prove them wrong. We'll tear their lies apart, one document at a time. Rachel allowed herself the smallest of smiles. That's the Elena I remember. For the first time since stepping off the taxi, Elena felt something stronger than grief stir in her chest, resolve. The battle wasn't over. It had just begun. Rachel's fingers tapped against the cafe table as she pulled up another file on her tablet. The glow from the screen highlighted the shadows under Elena's eyes. Raven Holdings, Rachel said, her tone clipped. On the surface, it looks legitimate. Registered in Nevada. A few real estate transactions. Some tax filings, all very neat. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. But look deeper, and it's smoke and mirrors. Elena frowned. What do you mean? Rachel swiped to another document, a property transfer, dated just 3 months ago. Elena's name was listed as the seller. The fake signature mocked her from the page. Her gut twisted. They sold my inheritance through a shell company. Not just sold it, Rachel replied. They laundered it. Raven Holdings has no employees, no physical office, not even a working phone line. Just a post office box in Las Vegas. It's a front, Elena. And fronts are used for one thing, hiding money. Elena's pulse quickened. She thought of Mark Keene, the expensive suits, the quiet arrogance, the way his eyes had glinted when he told her she didn't exist anymore. He had always seemed like the kind of man who thrived on secrets. Mark, she whispered. This has his fingerprints all over it. Rachel nodded. I checked. Raven Holdings is managed through a logistics consultancy. Guess who signed the papers? She turned the tablet again. The digital signature glared back, Mark A. Keene. For a moment, Elena couldn't breathe. It wasn't just her sister standing against her. Catherine's husband was orchestrating the theft like a chess master pulling strings from behind the curtain. They used Raven Holdings as a buffer, Rachel explained, her voice hardening. That way, if anything blows up, no one can trace it directly back to them. But the problem with people like Mark is, they always leave a trail. Bank transfers, utility spikes, suspicious filings. I guarantee they're using that house for more than just living in. Elena leaned forward, her jaw set. What do you mean? Rachel tapped her screen again, showing a chart. Look at this. The energy consumption at the property tripled last month. No permits for renovations. No explanation. Something's running in that basement. Elena. Something that shouldn't be. Elena's mind raced. Images of shadowy vans and locked rooms crept into her imagination. It was more than betrayal now. More than stolen inheritance. Something darker was at play. She tightened her grip on the edge of the table, her voice steady but laced with steel. If they think they can erase me, they've underestimated the wrong woman. I didn't survive 20 years of war to be defeated by forged paper and cowards in suits. Rachel met her eyes and gave a single resolute nod. Then let's go after them. Raven Holdings, Mark, all of them. And we won't stop until the truth comes out. For the first time, Elena felt the war wasn't behind her. It had simply changed battlefields. The evening air hung heavy with the damp chill of autumn as Elena parked a block away from the house she once called home. She hadn't planned on staying, but something inside her, an instinct sharpened by years of patrols and hostile terrain, told her she needed to watch. The house glowed faintly under the porch light. Catherine's car sat in the driveway, alongside Mark's gleaming truck. From a distance, it looked ordinary, domestic, almost peaceful. But Elena knew better. The spikes in power usage, the shell company, the lies, all of it gnawed at her. She sat in the shadows of her car, duffel in the back seat, uniform jacket pulled tight around her shoulders, when a movement caught her eye. A man, broad-shouldered, with the gait of someone who carried old injuries, approached the corner lamp post. He didn't look at her directly, but his presence was deliberate. After a moment, he slipped a folded piece of paper beneath her windshield wiper and kept walking. Elena's pulse quickened. She waited until he disappeared into the side alley before stepping out to retrieve it. The note was scrawled in quick, uneven handwriting. If you're the real Elena Ward, meet me at alley 7. 11 p.m. Come alone. Every instinct told her it was a risk, maybe even a trap. But instinct also told her something else. Someone wanted her to know the truth. At 11 sharp, she found herself standing beneath a flickering street lamp at the back of an old bakery. The alley smelled of oil and damp brick. From the shadows, the man emerged. "Name's Ethan," he said, his voice gravelly and steady. "Ethan Cole. I used to serve the Marine Corps. Now I fix cars down the block." His eyes studied her, sharp and cautious. "You don't know me, but I've been watching what's been going on at that house." Elena straightened, her posture. "And what exactly have you seen?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Black vans. No markings. They come in late, midnight, sometimes later. Men in gloves unloading crates into the basement. Never stay long. And your brother-in-law, he's there almost every time." A cold shiver crept down Elena's spine. "Mark!" Ethan nodded, his expression grim. "Always quiet, always looking over his shoulder. And those plates, they vanish the second those vans pull up. They're covering their tracks." For a moment, the silence of the alley pressed down on them both. Elena's mind raced back to the forged documents, the unexplained power surges, the way Catherine and her father had acted like strangers to her. Ethan's voice lowered, urgent. "They've been telling folks you're unstable, that you came back broken from the service. But I've seen enough to know the dangerous ones aren't you, it's them." Elena clenched her fists, her jaw set. She had spent 2 decades protecting her country from enemies abroad, and now it seemed the greatest danger was inside her own family home. She met Ethan's eyes, her voice cold and certain. "Then it's time I found out exactly what they're hiding." The night pressed in around her like a living thing, too quiet, too still. Elena crouched behind the half-collapsed fence at the edge of the property, her body dressed in dark clothes instead of the uniform that had once defined her. A small audio recorder sat clipped to her jacket, its red light barely visible in the shadows. The minutes dragged until, just past midnight, the low rumble of engines broke the silence. 2 black vans rolled down the street with headlights off, sliding into the driveway like ghosts. Elena held her breath as the rear doors opened. For men emerged, silent, coordinated, carrying heavy crates as if rehearsed. She recognized none of them until the 5th figure stepped into the porch light. Mark Keene. His stride was calm, confident, as though midnight deliveries were nothing more than a business routine. Her stomach clenched. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows as the men moved with practiced efficiency, unloading boxes into the basement. One carried a clipboard, another adjusted his gloves. Not a word was exchanged. This wasn't family life, this was an operation. Elena edged closer, her boots careful against loose gravel. She slipped her recorder through a cracked vent near the warehouse wall, angling it toward the muffled voices inside. For several minutes, she caught only fragments, low murmurs, shuffling crates, the scrape of metal. Then one voice cut through, harsh and commanding. "If that officer girl finds out," the man said, "cut her off. Permanently. No warnings." Elena froze, her breath locking in her chest. The voice was rough, deliberate, familiar. Her father, Robert Ward. The shock hit harder than any combat blast. She replayed the sentence in her head, again and again, praying she had misheard. But no, she knew that cadence, that Virginia drawl, that authority he used to command his family like a general. Now he was commanding her erasure. Her throat tightened, her hands shaking as she retrieved the recorder. The betrayal pierced deeper than the night's chill. Her father hadn't just ignored her from the window, hadn't just stayed silent. He wanted her gone. Slowly, Elena backed away from the fence, careful not to disturb the shadows that hid her. By the time she reached her car, her chest burned with a mix of fury and grief. Inside, she pressed play, listening to the voice again, his voice. Robert Ward, the man who once held her hand on the walk to school, now plotting to erase her like a mistake. Elena stared at the house, tears threatening but never falling. She had faced enemies across the world, but tonight she realized the most dangerous enemy was the man who had given her life. And now she had proof. Elena barely slept. She spent the night in her car, clutching the recorder like a lifeline. Every so often, she replayed the clip, just to reassure herself it was still there, that she hadn't imagined her father's voice, that she wasn't slipping into paranoia like they all claimed. By sunrise, exhaustion forced her eyes closed for a brief moment. When she jolted awake, the first thing she did was reach for the recorder. It was gone. Her stomach dropped. She tore through the car, searching under the seats, in her duffel, even in the glove compartment she hadn't opened in months. Nothing. Her pulse hammered as cold realization settled in. Someone had been here. Someone had taken it. Her phone buzzed, vibrating against the dashboard. An unknown number. With a trembling hand, she opened the message. "You're playing with fire. We have your psych report. Want the world to see what it says about you." Elena's breath caught. Her classified medical files, sealed records from her last deployment, were only accessible through military channels. 4 years, whispers had followed her home, unstable, unfit, broken. She fought to bury those rumors, to prove they were lies born of exhaustion and battlefield scars. And now, whoever had sent this message wanted to use them against her. She stared at the screen until the words blurred. Her mind raced back to the stolen recorder. Whoever had taken it wasn't just covering their tracks. They were preparing to destroy her credibility. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. "Walk away, Elena. Or next time it won't just be your reputation that's erased." Her hands shook, fury and fear colliding in her chest. She had spent 2 decades fighting wars for her country, standing firm against men who hid behind lies and intimidation. But nothing had ever cut this close to the bone. They weren't just stealing her house. They were dismantling her life, piece by piece. Elena closed her eyes, drawing in a steady breath. Whoever thought she would break under the weight of old wounds didn't know. "They want me silenced," she whispered to herself, her voice raw but steady. "But I'm not done fighting." The parking lot was nearly empty, the late afternoon sun stretching long shadows across cracked asphalt. Elena stood beside her car, her jacket pulled tight against the wind, her heart pounding with the same rhythm it had before combat briefings. When Robert Ward arrived, he didn't come alone. His navy sedan pulled in slowly, a black SUV trailing just behind. He stepped out in a pressed wool coat, hat pulled low, the posture of a man who wanted to appear in control. He didn't greet her, didn't smile, didn't even meet her eyes. "Dad," Elena said finally, her voice sharp with restrained fury. Robert adjusted his coat as if preparing for a business meeting. "You've changed," he said flatly, "and not for the better." The words cut deeper than a blade. Elena clenched her fists but didn't back down. "I came back after 20 years of service, after everything I gave for this country. And you," her throat tightened, but she forced the words out, "you erased me." His gaze remained distant, cold. "You came back different. reckless, and your return jeopardizes everything we've built. She took a step closer, her boots scraping against the pavement. Everything you've built was stolen. I know about the forged deed. I know about Raven Holdings. And I have audio your voice, telling them to cut me off permanently. For the first time, his jaw tensed. His eyes flickered with recognition, but his expression remained guarded. I meant what I said, Robert replied, lowering his tone. We've done what was necessary to protect the family name. Catherine and Mark are part of a respected enterprise. You live in a car. Elena's chest tightened, her anger rising like a storm. You call this protection? Forged signatures, shell companies, laundering money through a house that doesn't belong to you. That's not protection, it's corruption. Robert finally turned to face her fully, his eyes colder than she had ever seen. I chose what was best for the family. And you were not part of it. The admission landed like a hammer blow. For years, Elena had clung to the hope that her father had been deceived, manipulated, that maybe Catherine and Mark had kept him in the dark. But now the truth was unmistakable. He wasn't a victim. He was an architect. She swallowed hard, her voice breaking but resolute. Then you made your choice. And so have I. Behind Robert, the black SUV idled. A man stepped out, broad-shouldered, wearing a silver watch Elena recognized from the midnight warehouse drop. Her father didn't even flinch at the sight. Robert straightened his coat and looked at her one last time. You're not one of us anymore. The words didn't echo. They landed and stayed, heavy as stone. As he turned back to his car, Elena's heart didn't break, it hardened. Whatever hope she had of redemption, of reunion, of family was gone. Now there was only truth and justice. That night, Elena sat in her dimly lit apartment, a place she had rented by the week, furnished with nothing but a thin mattress and a single chair. Her duffel rested in the corner, still unpacked. She stared at the wall, her father's words replaying in her mind like a wound that refused to close. A knock broke the silence. She tensed, her hand instinctively brushing the small knife she kept tucked in her boot. When she opened the door, no one was there. Only an envelope lay on the floor, plain and sealed with tape. Elena crouched and picked it up. Her name was handwritten across the front. No return address. No explanation. She tore it open with steady fingers and froze. Inside was a photocopy of her grandfather's original will. The pages were yellowed, the ink slightly faded, but the words were clear. I leave my home, located at 312 Sycamore Lane, to my granddaughter, Elena Ward. Her name, her address, his signature, dated, notarized and unaltered. Her eyes stung as she traced the familiar handwriting. This was the document she remembered, the promise her grandfather had given her all those years ago. Proof that she had not imagined it, proof that her family had not simply rewritten history. Stapled to the top was a note, handwritten in careful script. I notarized this will the day it was signed. I know they falsified it later. Don't let them bury the truth. Elena sank onto the mattress, clutching the paper like it was both a weapon and a lifeline. Her pulse raced, her breath uneven. 4 weeks, she had been fighting shadows, lies, forged documents, whispered accusations about her sanity. But now, in her hands, was something undeniable. Proof. She snapped a photo and sent it to Rachel with a single line. This changes everything. For the first time since her return, Elena felt the tide shifting. No longer was she the erased daughter, the outcast that the stranger of life. Now she was the rightful heir, and she had the evidence to prove it. Rachel's office smelled faintly of paper and strong coffee, the kind of place where battles were fought not with weapons but with records, signatures, and fine print. Elena sat across from her, the copy of her grandfather's will spread between them like a shield. Rachel leaned forward, her brow furrowed as she scrolled through pages of digital files. I've been digging deeper into Raven Holdings, she said, her voice tight with focus. And you're not going to like what I found. Elena's hands clenched around the edge of the chair. Tell me. Rachel turned her screen so Elena could see. Raven Holdings wasn't just created for real estate. It was flagged in a counterintelligence probe back in 2012. The FBI suspected it was being used as a front company to launder money through false defense contracts. Elena's heart thudded. Defense contracts. She knew that world well. Procurement, supply chains, the endless paperwork and coded systems she had spent years overseeing. If Raven Holdings was tied to it, this wasn't just family betrayal anymore. This was federal crime. Rachel tapped another file open. Here's where it gets worse. Look at the consultant listed on their logistics branch. Elena read the name out loud, her stomach sinking. Mark A. Keene. Rachel nodded grimly. Your brother-in-law wasn't just a bystander. He's been in this for years. Back then, investigators tied him to falsified compliance reports on military supply bids. The case was sealed before it went to trial, probably because someone upstairs pulled strings. But the paper trail didn't disappear. Elena swallowed hard. She remembered Mark at her grandfather's funeral, leaning close and whispering, "Stick to your war zones, Elena. This isn't your terrain." Back then it had felt like arrogance. Now it felt like a warning. "Rachel," Elena said, her voice low, "he's not just stealing from me. He's exploiting federal systems, using my family home as cover." Rachel clicked to another chart. Bank transfers, suspiciously routed through Nevada, Cayman Islands, then funneled back into an account under Catherine's name. "Exactly," Rachel replied. "And here's the kicker. $500,000 moved into your sister's account in just the last 18 months. All of it tied to Raven Holdings." Elena stared at the screen, her anger sharpening into resolve. Her father's silence, Catherine's hostility, Mark's smugness. It all made sense now. They weren't protecting the family. They were protecting a criminal empire built on stolen signatures and fraudulent contracts. Rachel sat back, eyes sharp. "Elena, if we can connect your grandfather's will to these transactions, we don't just have a case for inheritance theft. We have evidence of federal conspiracy." Elena met her gaze, her voice steady. "Then we bring it all down. Raven Holdings, Mark, Catherine, even my father if we have to." Rachel gave a single, resolute nod. "We will." And for the first time, Elena realized this wasn't just about reclaiming a house. It was about exposing the rot that her family had chosen to build their lives on. The kitchen table in Elena's apartment had become a war room. Instead of maps and battle plans, it was covered in manila folders, flash drives, and stacks of documents Rachel had subpoenaed through quiet back channels. The hum of Elena's old laptop filled the silence as the screen glowed with encrypted files. Rachel stood at the head of the table like a commander, methodically arranging the evidence. "We need 3 things: proof of the forgery, proof of the financial trail, and proof they exploited your credentials for defense contracts. If we have all 3, no judge in the country will dismiss this." Ethan Cole leaned against the counter, grease-stained hands shoved into his jacket pockets, his sharp eyes watching the street outside the window. "And if they realize we're digging this deep, they'll hit back. Hard." Elena nodded. "Let them. I've been hit before." Rachel's phone buzzed. She answered and placed it on speaker. A distorted voice came through, calm and deliberate. "This is Kayla. I've cracked the first layer of their VPN." Elena leaned forward, her pulse quickening. "What did you find?" "Enough," Kayla replied. "They thought they were clever, routing through offshore servers, hiding transactions under shell vendors. But there's a DNS leak. And guess whose home IP address keeps showing up in the chain?" Rachel glanced at Elena. "Catherine." "Bingo," Kayla said. "Your sister was running money transfers directly from her own network. Amateur mistake, but it's gold for us." Elena exhaled, her jaw tightening. "She erased me from the family, but left her fingerprints all over the crime." Kayla continued, "And it gets better. One of the purchase orders I traced through Raven Holdings matches a serial batch from a certified drone contract. That batch disappeared during your deployment in Kuwait, Elena. Guess where it ended up?" Elena's stomach dropped. "In their hands." Rachel scribbled notes furiously. Forged signatures, laundered money, and stolen military tech. This isn't just inheritance theft anymore. This is national security fraud, Ethan pushed away from the counter, his voice low. And now you know why they're desperate to silence you. The room fell quiet. Elena looked at the evidence scattered before her. Each document, each file, each recording. Her family hadn't just betrayed her. They had weaponized her absence, her service, and her name. She straightened, her voice cold but unshakable. They stole my home, my inheritance, and tried to erase me. But now we have their crimes in black and white. Rachel met her eyes. And we're going to bring it all to court. Kayla's voice crackled one last time through the speaker. Just remember, people who build empires on fraud don't go down quietly. Be ready. Elena reached for the copy of her grandfather's will, laying it on top of the pile like a battle standard. I've been ready my whole life. The Fairfax County Courthouse was all glass and steel, sterile and humming with quiet authority. Elena had faced military tribunals and high-security briefings, but walking through those doors with Rachel at her side carried a different weight. This was not war abroad. This was war at home. Rachel's leather case swung against her hip as they approached the clerk's desk. She didn't hesitate. We're filing for an emergency injunction, she said crisply, sliding a thick folder across the counter. Fraudulent transfer of property, notarized proof of forgery, and financial records linking the defendants to shell companies. We want a freeze on all transactions tied to the clerk, a woman with tired eyes and sharp instincts, leafed through the first pages. Her brows lifted when she saw the notarized will. This is substantial. Elena stepped forward, her voice low but steady. That house was left to me by my grandfather. They forged my name to steal it. I want it frozen before they bury it under another company. For a moment, silence lingered. Then the clerk stamped the paperwork with a heavy thunk. Effective immediately, all transfers on this property are suspended pending investigation. A line in the sand. By noon, Elena and Rachel stood in front of the house, not lurking across the street this time, parked boldly in the driveway. Catherine's silver Lexus was already there, Mark's truck beside it. Elena's pulse quickened as she rang the doorbell. When Catherine opened the door, her polished smile faltered at the sight of her sister in uniform and Rachel holding the official envelope. You can't be serious, Catherine hissed as Rachel handed over the injunction. Dead serious, Rachel replied coolly. Effective immediately, you're barred from selling, leasing, or modifying this property. You've been notified. Mark appeared behind her, his face shadowed with fury. He took the envelope from Catherine's trembling hands and scanned it quickly. When his eyes lifted to Elena's, they were hard as stone. You really want to play this game? He asked, voice low and dangerous. You don't know who you're fighting. Elena didn't flinch. I used to investigate internal corruption at the Pentagon. Men like you bluff, threaten, and fold. And I've seen enough to know you're already afraid. For the briefest flicker, something in his expression shifted. Fear, masked quickly by anger. Catherine's voice cracked. This is harassment. You can't do this. Rachel cut her off sharply. Fraud is a felony, Catherine. And now the clock is ticking. The door slammed shut, so hard the glass rattled. Elena and Rachel stood in silence for a moment before turning back toward the car. They're unraveling, Rachel said quietly. Elena's gaze lingered on the house, her jaw set. Good. Let them. The sky over Arlington was gray, heavy with the promise of rain, as Elena and Rachel walked through the glass doors of the U.S. Attorney's office. The air inside was colder, sharper, as if the building itself demanded truth. They were escorted to a conference room on the 7th floor, all glass walls and polished steel. At the far end sat Matthew Cruz, Assistant U.S. Attorney for Northern Virginia, a man whose handshake was firm but whose eyes gave nothing away. He gestured for them to sit. Rachel set down a bulging case file with the confidence of someone who knew every page would cut deep. Ms. Ward, Cruz began, his voice even, we've reviewed the evidence you and Ms. Klein submitted. The forged deed, the financial transfers through Raven Holdings, the use of your military clearance codes, it's enough to move forward. Elena felt her pulse quicken. 4 weeks, She had been treated like an intruder, a liar, a ghost in her own life. Now, finally, the system was listening. Cruz opened a leather binder. Based on what we've received, federal subpoenas are being issued today against Catherine Keene, Mark Keene, and Robert Ward for conspiracy and fraud. They will be compelled to testify at a closed preliminary hearing 2 weeks from now. The words struck like thunder. Elena's sister, her brother-in-law, her father, no longer shielded by silence or influence, they were defendants now. Rachel leaned forward. We're requesting protective status for Elena until charges are filed. Her family has already attempted intimidation. Cruz nodded. We'll grant anonymity during the preliminary phase. But understand, once indictments are official, this will go public. Elena's jaw tightened. That's fine. By then, I'll be ready to say everything out loud. Cruz studied her for a long moment before closing the binder with a decisive snap. Then prepare yourself, Ms. Ward. Families may betray you. But courts don't care about blood, they care about proof. And you've given us plenty. Later that afternoon, Elena and Rachel lingered in the lobby of Catherine's nonprofit office. They watched from behind tinted glass as a U.S. Marshal approached Catherine in the atrium. Phones frozen mid-scroll. The receptionist gasped. You are hereby summoned under federal subpoena, the Marshal announced, handing her the envelope. Catherine's carefully crafted smile shattered. Her hand trembled as she clutched the papers. For a moment her eyes scanned the room, wild and searching, as though she could sense her sister watching from the shadows. Across town, Mark was handed his own subpoena at his corporate headquarters, his face dark with rage. And in a quiet cul-de-sac, Robert Ward opened his envelope on the porch, his expression unreadable as neighbors pretended not to stare. For the first time, Elena wasn't the one on trial. They were. And their empire of lies had just been dragged into federal light. The federal courthouse in Alexandria was packed, rows of benches filled with reporters, veterans in worn uniforms, and strangers drawn to the spectacle of a family tearing itself apart under oath. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but Elena could feel the weight of every gaze as she stood at the witness stand. The oath tasted like sandpaper on her tongue. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. When she lowered her hand, her palms were damp, but her voice was steady. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Matthew Cruz, approached first. Ms. Ward, he began, can you describe for the court what was done to your property? Elena met his eyes, then shifted her gaze to the judge. My grandfather left his house to me. The deed was altered after his death. My signature was forged on a transfer I never saw. My name was erased. Cruz nodded, then held up a photograph of the falsified deed. The jury leaned forward. And did you authorize this transaction? No, her voice cut through the courtroom, sharp as steel. I was serving overseas at the time. I didn't even know it existed. One by one, Cruz laid out the evidence Rachel and Kayla had pieced together. The notarized copy of her grandfather's original will with Elena's name intact. A chain of forged signatures, identical to one taken from her 2017 tax return. Bank transfers from Raven Holdings to offshore accounts, funneled back into Catherine's name. Procurement documents tied to Mark Keene, using Elena's old clearance codes to access military bids. The walls of the courtroom seemed to tighten with every exhibit. Cruz gestured toward the screen where Kayla's forensic analysis glowed, IP logs tracing wire transfers back to Catherine's home network. Ms. Ward, do you recognize these codes? Elena swallowed, then nodded. Yes, they were mine. Clearance codes assigned to me during active service. They were stolen and used to file contracts under Mark Keene's company. That isn't just forgery. That's federal fraud. Gasps rippled through the benches. Cruz stepped back. Did you consent to the use of your credentials? Never. He let the silence hang before turning to the judge. The government submits that this was not a familial misunderstanding, but a deliberate conspiracy designed to erase this woman's inheritance, launder money, and exploit federal systems for personal gain. The defense scrambled. Catherine's attorney tried to paint Elena as unstable, citing her years in combat. My client acted in the belief her sister had no interest in the home. This is a simple family dispute. Elena leaned forward into the microphone, her voice cold. A family dispute doesn't involve forged signatures, offshore accounts, and stolen military contracts. The judge banged her gavel for order as murmurs surged. At the defense table, Catherine sat pale, her lips trembling. Mark whispered furiously to his lawyer, his jaw locked tight. Robert Ward, however, didn't move. His face was carved from stone, his eyes fixed on the floor, refusing to look at the daughter testifying against him. For the first time, Elena realized she wasn't speaking as the disowned child or even as the veteran dismissed as broken. She was standing as a federal witness, with the power to bring her family's empire of lies crashing down. The courtroom fell silent as Cruz asked his final question. In your opinion, Ms. Ward, was this a deliberate conspiracy? Elena met her father's gaze at last. Her voice was clear, unwavering. Yes. The courtroom felt colder after Elena's testimony, as if her words had sucked the warmth out of the air. Silence pressed against the walls until Catherine's attorney rose, clearly rattled. Mrs. Keene, he said carefully, gesturing for her to take the stand. Catherine moved slowly, her heels clicking against the tile like a metronome marking her unraveling composure. She sat stiffly, but the mask she wore so easily at fundraisers and social galas was cracking. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the witness chair. Mrs. Keene, her attorney prompted gently, can you explain your role in the handling of your family's property? Catherine's eyes darted toward Elena, once with defiance, then with something close to desperation. Her voice broke on the first words. I didn't do it alone. The gallery stirred. Reporters scribbled furiously. Catherine's composure collapsed. Tears streaked her carefully painted face as she turned toward the defense table, pointing a shaking finger at her husband. It was Mark. He told me it was safe, that it was legal. I only signed what he gave me. He said it was to protect the family. Mark's jaw flexed, but he didn't speak. He sat like stone, his hand curling into a fist against his thigh. But the sheen of sweat on his temple betrayed him. For the first time, fear cracked through his arrogant calm. The defense scrambled to contain the chaos. Catherine's attorney tried to rein her in, but she was spiraling, her sobs echoing through the chamber. I didn't know about the money laundering. I didn't know about the contracts. I just wanted Dad to be proud of me. Elena's throat tightened, but she didn't flinch. She had heard those words before. In childhood, in arguments, in every moment where Catherine demanded center stage. And now, even here, Catherine was begging for their father's approval. All eyes turned to Robert Ward. He sat stiffly at the defense table, hands folded, his face unreadable. He didn't look at Catherine. He didn't look at Mark. And he certainly didn't look at Elena. His silence was louder than Catherine's tears. Cruz rose slowly, stepping closer to the witness stand. Mrs. Keene, are you saying your husband orchestrated this entire scheme? Yes, Catherine cried. Yes, it was him. He used Elena's name, her clearance codes. He said no one would ever believe her if she came back. That she was broken. Elena inhaled sharply, fury simmering under her skin. There it was, the lie that had followed her home from war, weaponized against her by the people who should have protected her. Mark finally lifted his head, meeting Elena's eyes across the room. His expression was calm, but his knuckles were white, his breathing sharp. He didn't need to speak. The fear in his eyes said enough. And Robert, he shifted only once, his gaze fixed on the table. Not a glance toward his sobbing daughter. Not a word for the one testifying against him. To him, silence was safer than shame. For Elena, that silence was a final confirmation. Her father would never stand with her. Not in life. Not in truth. And as the judge called for order, Elena realized the family she once fought to return to was gone, shattered beyond repair. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. Disgraced family faces fraud probe, veteran daughter betrayed, defense contractor tied to shell company scandal. The headlines splashed across newspapers, news feeds, and TV broadcasts. Elena's face, once blurred out of her own family history, was now everywhere, captured in court sketches and stock photos from her military service. For years, Catherine and Mark had cultivated an image of wealth and respectability, charity galas, business panels, glossy interviews about family values. But by noon, reporters camped outside their gated neighborhood. Helicopters hovered overhead. Neighbors whispered on front lawns as cameras flashed. Raven Holdings issued a terse press release. Effective immediately, Mark A. Keene is no longer affiliated with Raven Holdings, LLC. The company denies knowledge of or involvement in alleged fraudulent activity. Elena read it twice, a bitter smile tugging at her lips. The empire Mark thought untouchable had just abandoned him, cutting him loose like dead weight. Meanwhile, Catherine's downfall came in numbers. Her bank accounts, once overflowing with offshore deposits, were frozen pending investigation. Credit cards declined. Staff at her nonprofit resigned overnight. By evening, she was photographed outside a boutique, her face streaked with tears as her card was refused. Robert's collapse was quieter, but no less brutal. Once respected in civic circles, he had been known as the Ward Patriarch, the man whose word carried weight in veteran organizations and local politics. Now his name was poison. Invitations were rescinded. Calls went unanswered. Old allies distanced themselves with polite denials. By the third day of coverage, Robert sat alone in his driveway, the local paper in his lap. The headline read, "War Hero's Daughter Disowned, now the key witness against him." He didn't move when neighbors passed, didn't look up when cameras lingered at the end of the block. For a man who once commanded authority with his presence, silence was all that remained. Elena watched from a distance, standing across the street. She didn't approach, didn't speak. 4 years, she had longed for his recognition, his approval. But now, seeing him diminished not by her testimony but by his own choices, she felt no victory, only a hollow finality. The empire her family built on lies, fraud, and betrayal was collapsing piece by piece. And for the first time since she had come home, Elena felt the balance shifting. Not in her favor, not entirely, but away from them. The courtroom was silent, heavy with anticipation. Weeks of testimony, mountains of evidence, and countless headlines had all led to this moment. Elena sat in the gallery, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white, her eyes fixed on the bench where Judge Avery prepared to speak. The defendants sat in a row, Catherine, pale and trembling, Mark, stiff and expressionless, Robert, stone-faced, his jaw set like granite. They looked less like a family, and more like a fractured lineup of strangers bound together by betrayal. The judge's voice cut through the silence. "Mark Andrew Keene," she said, her tone measured, "you stand convicted of conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, and unlawful use of federal contracts. You orchestrated a scheme that endangered national security and exploited your own family. You are hereby sentenced to 8 years in federal prison." A murmur rippled through the room. Mark closed his eyes briefly, his mask of confidence crackled for the first time. "Catherine Marie Keene," the judge continued, "while your role was less direct, you willingly participated in fraud and benefited financially. You attempted to deflect blame, but the evidence shows you were complicit. You were sentenced to 6 years in federal prison." Catherine broke. Tears streamed down her face as her lawyer gripped her arm. She turned once toward Robert in despair, but he didn't meet her eyes. The judge's gaze shifted to the patriarch. "Robert Jonathan Ward, you were entrusted with respect, with leadership, with family. Instead, you chose greed. You aided in the forgery of your own granddaughter's inheritance and sanctioned threats to silence her. This court finds your actions especially egregious, given your position of trust." The pause was heavy, deliberate. "You are sentenced to 10 years in federal prison without parole." The words landed like a hammer. Even Catherine gasped, her sobs echoing off the marble walls. Mark sat rigid, his face pale. Robert did not move, his eyes fixed on the bench in front of him. No flicker of regret, No plea for mercy, just silence, the same silence that had followed him since the trial began. Elena's breath trembled as the gavel struck. 4 years. Her family had erased her, silenced her, branded her unstable. Now the truth was carved into record, undeniable, irreversible. As the marshals stepped forward to escort them out, Catherine looked back at Elena with tear-filled eyes, pleading, perhaps, for forgiveness. Mark kept his gaze forward, his arrogance buried beneath fear. And Robert never turned at all. For the first time, Elena didn't need him to. The sentences were handed down, the lies exposed, the weight of betrayal shifted where it belonged. Justice had spoken. The courthouse was behind her, but Elena still carried its weight. The echo of the gavel, the faces of her family as they were led away, those memories would not fade quickly. Yet, as she stepped into the crisp evening air, something had shifted inside her. For the first time in years, she was not carrying the burden alone. Rachel was waiting outside, her lawyer's briefcase at her side, exhaustion etched into her features. But when she saw Elena, she smiled, a real unguarded smile. "You did it," she said softly. Ethan was there too, leaning against his old pickup, arms crossed. He gave her a nod, the kind that spoke more than words. And Kayla, younger and sharper than both of them, waved from the hood of her car, holding up a flash drive like a trophy. Elena felt her chest tighten, not with grief this time, but with something she hadn't felt in years. Belonging. They walked together down the courthouse steps, for unlikely allies bound by truth. Rachel slipped her arm through Elena's, grounding her. Ethan fell into step beside them, his voice low. Blood doesn't always make family. Loyalty does. Elena glanced at him, seeing the same scars of betrayal and resilience in his eyes that she carried in her own. Kayla chimed in with a grin. Besides, we make a pretty solid team. Lawyer, soldier, mechanic, hacker. We could start our own crime-fighting unit. They laughed, and for the first time in weeks, Elena's laughter didn't feel forced. As they sat later in Rachel's kitchen, the weight of the trial finally behind them, Elena looked around the table. Coffee cups, scattered files, and takeout boxes cluttered the surface, but to her it felt like something sacred. Not the cold dinners of her childhood, filled with judgment and silence, but a gathering of people who had chosen to stand beside her when it mattered most. Her voice was quiet, but certain. I thought I lost my family forever. But maybe I just had to find the right one. Rachel squeezed her hand. Ethan gave her a steady nod. Kayla raised her cup in a mock toast. For Elena, the war with her blood relatives was over. The scars would remain, but so would the people who had stood with her when no one else would. And that, she realized, was what family truly meant. Weeks after the sentencing, when the headlines had begun to fade and the cameras turned elsewhere, Elena drove not to Sycamore Lane, but into the heart of Washington, D.C. The city pulsed with its usual rhythm, tourists with cameras, workers in suits, cadets marching in formation, but Elena walked with a steady calm, her purpose clear. She stopped at the Defense Service Library, a towering building of marble and glass that stood like a monument to sacrifice and duty. Inside, the air was hushed, filled with the scent of old paper and polished stone. Along the main hall stretched the Wall of Honor, engraved with the names of those who had served with distinction. Elena traced her fingers across the etched letters until she found it. Elena Ward, carved deep into the stone. Beneath it, the inscription, Distinguished Service Medal, Iraq and Afghanistan Campaigns, 20 years of service. Her breath caught, not from sorrow, but from something brighter. For so long, her family had tried to erase her, to rewrite her story, to brand her as broken. Yet here, in stone, her name stood permanent, unaltered, untouchable. This was her inheritance. Not the stolen house on Sycamore Lane, not the fortune funneled through shell companies, but the honor of service, the legacy of resilience, and the knowledge that she had stood her ground against enemies abroad and at home. Rachel, Ethan, and Kayla met her there, lingering quietly behind her. None of them spoke at first. They didn't need to. They simply stood with her, their presence a reminder of the family she had chosen and the battles she had survived. At last, Elena turned, her eyes calm, her voice steady. "They took the house, the years, and tried to take my name. But they couldn't touch this. Honor isn't theirs to give or take." Ethan gave her a quiet nod, his voice rough with emotion. "That's the kind of inheritance no one can steal." Elena looked once more at her name etched in stone, sunlight glinting across its surface like a promise. Then she stepped away, leaving the marble hall with her head high. Her legacy was not bricks and timber, but something greater, etched not only in stone, but in every step she had taken to reclaim herself. And at last, Elena Ward was home.